I can't believe you drove that thing here. The voice belonged to my sister, Serena, a woman whose self-worth was measured in horsepower and brand names. She pointed a perfectly manicured finger at my faithful Toyota Corolla, her laughter echoing across the manicured lawn of the country club for everyone to hear. She declared, "You look like a nanny arriving for her shift." But that memory dissolves, replaced by a much sharper one from the future. It's the same car, but now Serena stands before it, her face a pale mask of disbelief. A stoic man in a dark suit, an earpiece nestled in his ear, speaks into his wrist. His voice is quiet, but it cuts the air. "Ma'am, for your own safety, please step away from the director's vehicle." That single word, director, hangs in the air between them, an impossible fact that shatters her entire world. Serena's face just collapses. To understand that look on her face, you have to rewind to the moment my arrival soured her perfect family reunion. I had pulled up to the club's grand entrance, my unassuming 2008 Toyota looking like a dinghy next to a fleet of yachts. The valet, a kid no older than 19, gave my car a look of such profound disdain it was almost comical. It was the familiar, weary judgment I'd seen 1,000 times before, the silent confirmation that I simply didn't belong. The car was just another piece of evidence in the case they'd built against me my whole life, the case of the disappointing invisible child. Before I could even turn off the engine, Serena was there, rapping her knuckles on my window as if I were a delivery driver. She launched into her nanny comment, projecting for the benefit of our relatives who smirked from the veranda. The laughter stung as always, but it was the arrival of the club security guard that turned the casual cruelty into a public spectacle. He approached with a clipboard and an air of bureaucratic authority. "Ma'am, this vehicle isn't registered on the guest list. You'll have to park in the overflow lot." He said it so loudly, so formally. Serena, ever the magnanimous queen, waved a dismissive hand. "It's fine, officer. She's with me." Then she leaned in, her voice a stage whisper dripping with condescending sweetness. "Just try to park it behind the kitchens." And there it was. At that moment, I wasn't just family. I was a logistical problem, an unsightly blemish to be hidden away with the trash. A cold, quiet fury began to build behind my ribs, sharp and precise. She laughed, thinking the biggest consequence of her joke was me having to park next to the dumpsters. She had no idea she'd just insulted me and my vehicle in front of the one person whose security I was there to assess. To understand the silent federal-level correction that was about to unfold, you have to understand the two lives I was living. To understand the two lives I was living, you first have to understand my family's universe. At its center were two blazing suns, my sister Serena and her husband, Ethan. Ethan was a charismatic tech entrepreneur who spoke of disruptive innovation and funding rounds with the fervor of a preacher. My parents, particularly my mother, Carol, a woman who believed peace was more important than fairness, orbited them in a state of perpetual adoration. Their lives were a performance of success, and my family were the front-row audience, cheering for every line. I, on the other hand, was the stagehand they preferred to keep in the wings, silent and out of sight. This dynamic was never clearer than at our last Christmas dinner. The air was thick with the scent of pine and roasting turkey, a forced holiday cheer plastered over years of quiet tensions. Ethan, raising a glass of champagne, announced that his company had just secured another $20 million round of funding. The table erupted. My father, a man who measured worth in stock portfolios and headlines, beamed as if he'd secured the deal himself. My mother was already planning how to weave this accomplishment into her next letter to the relatives. They hung on his every word, their faces glowing with pride. It was a perfect family moment. Later, during a lull in the conversation, I tried to share a piece of my own news. I actually got an award at work a few weeks ago," I said quietly. My mother smiled, that placid, vacant smile she reserved for my life. "Oh, that's wonderful, dear." I pressed on, hoping for a flicker of genuine interest. It was the Treasury Department's Exceptional Service Award for some work I led on a special project. My father patted my hand without making eye contact, his attention already drifting back to Ethan. "That's nice, dear," he mumbled. "More spreadsheets." Serena, overhearing, let out a little sigh of theatrical boredom. "It's just so hard to get excited about paperwork, you know?" Paperwork, spreadsheets. That was the totality of my career in their eyes. A boring, stable, but ultimately meaningless government admin job. At that moment, I didn't just hear their dismissal. I saw the internal ledger flash before my eyes. The science fair project they missed for Serena's ballet recital. The college graduation they left early to get Ethan to the airport. The countless phone calls where my professional achievements were met with a polite, "That's nice," before immediately changing the subject back to Serena. The award in my pocket, a heavy medallion in a velvet box, suddenly felt like a cheap trinket. I just nodded and took a sip of water, the silence confirming everything I already knew. My professional reality, however, was no spreadsheet world. It was a world of sterile, windowless rooms deep in the heart of Washington, D.C. I wasn't an admin. I was the Deputy Director of the U.S. Secret Service's Office of Protective Intelligence. My boring desk job was a carefully constructed cover for a life spent managing threat assessments against the most powerful people on the planet. My world was one of immense, crushing pressure where a single oversight could have catastrophic global consequences. It was a world they couldn't understand. I remember one particular Tuesday just days after that Christmas dinner. I was leading a red cell exercise in a SCF, a sensitive compartmented information facility. The only sound was the low hum of encrypted servers and the quiet breathing of the 5 other people in the room. We were wargaming the vice president's upcoming trip to a volatile region. A senior agent, a man with 20 years of field experience, was insisting the primary threat was a known extremist group. But the data I was analyzing told a different story. I saw the pre-incident indicators he was missing, the subtle shift in financial transactions, the whispers on encrypted channels, the sudden purchase of specific commercial chemicals. It was behavioral pattern analysis, and it pointed not to the known group, but to a lone wolf actor. "The threat isn't from the north, sir," I said calmly, pointing to a cascading series of data points on the screen. "It's from the west. We need to adjust the denial of access protocols around the motorcade's secondary route, or we're leaving a 4-minute window of unacceptable risk." The agent started to argue, but my boss, Director Jackson, a grizzled, no-nonsense veteran who had seen everything, held up a hand for silence. He stared at my screen for a long moment, his eyes tracing the connections I'd found. Then he looked at me and gave a single sharp nod. "Do it, Echo," he said, using my operational call sign. "Adjust the plan." In that room, my analysis wasn't paperwork. It was what kept people alive. My word was final, and my car, that old Toyota they mocked, was an essential part of that world. It wasn't a symbol of my failure to keep up with them. It was a symbol of my professional success. In my line of work, anonymity is the greatest asset. We called it a ghost car, a deliberately nondescript vehicle that could blend into any street, any neighborhood, allowing me to conduct low-profile site surveys without ever drawing a second glance. To my family, it was a nanny's car. To my colleagues, and to the people we protected, it was the ultimate gray man tool, a cloak of invisibility that allowed me to do my job. It was a shield. For a decade, I had tried to earn their respect in their language, the language of emotion and family, but they only spoke the language of status and power. The incident at the country club made me realize it was time to stop speaking and start issuing a formal directive. After the humiliation at the country club, I didn't rage. I didn't cry. I went back to my world of quiet, methodical analysis, and I waited. I knew with the certainty of a meteorologist predicting a hurricane that my brother-in-law Ethan's ambition would eventually create an opening. It came 3 months later in an email that landed in my inbox with a soft digital chime that felt like the cocking of a hammer. The subject line read, "Security Assessment Request." The location was the country club. The event was a high-profile political fundraiser, and the applicant was Ethan. He was seeking to host a fundraiser for a cabinet secretary, an event designed to catapult him into a new league of influence. And by federal protocol, Any event involving a cabinet-level official required a full threat assessment from the Secret Service, an assessment that had to be signed off by my office. My hands were steady on the keyboard as I read it. The familiar hot sting of injustice was gone, replaced by a cold, surgical clarity. This would not be an emotional confrontation. My goal wasn't revenge. Revenge is messy. This was to be a threat mitigation and status correction, a quiet procedural recalibration of my family's distorted reality, executed using the very system I commanded. The plan formed in my mind with crystalline precision, a multi-layered strategy of protocol and procedure. First, I would assign myself as the lead agent for the advanced team site survey, a standard but powerful move that put me in direct control. Second, I would schedule the final high-level security walkthrough for the evening of the club's annual charity gala, an event I knew my sister Serena was chairing. It was their biggest social event of the year, the perfect stage. Third, I would ensure my boss, Director Jackson, personally attended that final walkthrough. The presence of a cabinet secretary was the perfect justification to require his direct sign-off. I walked into Director Jackson's office the next morning, the file on Ethan in my hand. I kept my briefing sterile and professional, my voice flat. "Sir, the applicant for the Oak Ridge event has several low-level flags," I began, pointing to the relevant sections. "There are some minor financial irregularities in his corporate filings and a few social connections that, while not disqualifying, could complicate protection protocols." I never mentioned he was my brother-in-law. I never mentioned my sister. I was simply Agent Echo presenting a risk profile. He listened in silence, his steepled fingers hiding his mouth, but his eyes, sharp and knowing, were fixed on me. He knew my entire history without me saying a word. He closed the file and looked at me, a long, unreadable moment passing between us. Then a corner of his mouth twitched, the barest hint of a smile. "Your assessment is thorough, Echo," he said, his voice a low gravel. "I'll clear my schedule for the final walkthrough myself." He paused, then delivered the final critical piece. "We'll use your vehicle for the low-profile approach." It was a green light, a federally sanctioned green light. The manifests were filed. The motorcade routes were planned. The access lists were finalized. They were so excited to welcome the powerful. They had no idea the most powerful person in the room was going to arrive in a Toyota Corolla. The air outside the Oak Ridge Country Club was thick with the scent of money and privilege. From my car, parked a block away, I could see the fairy lights twinkling in the trees and hear the distant chime of laughter and clinking glasses. It was the night of the annual charity gala, my sister Serena's crowning social achievement of the year. Through my binoculars, I could see her, a vision in silk, flitting between guests like a monarch butterfly. Her husband, Ethan, was right beside her, schmoozing with a local congressman, his face glowing with smug self-importance. They were the king and queen of this little kingdom. And tonight, I was here to conduct a formal inspection of their castle's foundations. I took a final steadying breath and put the car in drive. The plan was in motion. As my old Toyota Corolla crunched up the gravel driveway, I saw the familiar look of disdain on the new valet's face. But this time was different. As I rolled to a stop, two imposing black Suburbans with diplomatic plates glided to a halt directly behind me, their tinted windows reflecting the club's ostentatious facade. The valet froze, his mouth slightly agape. I got out of the car dressed in a sharp, dark pantsuit that was the civilian equivalent of a uniform. A moment later, the passenger door of my Toyota opened, and the distinguished silver-haired Director Jackson emerged. The entire valet staff, along with the club security, became rigid. They recognized him instantly. The air crackled with a new, unspoken authority. Serena saw me. Her eyes narrowed, and she immediately broke away from her conversation, marching across the lawn with the righteous fury of a queen whose domain had been invaded by a peasant. She didn't even seem to notice Director Jackson at first. Her entire focus was a laser beam of indignation directed at me. "Elise, what is this?" she hissed, her voice low but shaking with anger. "Who did you bring here? We have a strict guest list. You can't just show up with your boss." She gestured vaguely at the director, assuming he was just some mid-level manager I'd presumptuously dragged along. Before I could utter a single word, Director Jackson took a small step forward, his presence alone commanding the space. "Ma'am," he said, his voice calm and resonant. "I'm Director Jackson. I believe your husband is expecting us. We're here for the final security walkthrough for his proposed event." Serena's mouth snapped shut. The name, the title. It didn't compute, but it was important enough to stun her into a rare, shocked silence. The club manager and his head of security practically sprinted over, their faces pale and etched with panic as they offered stammering apologies for the unseemly welcome as they began to lead us toward the main entrance. Serena trailed behind us, her mind clearly racing to connects that refused to align. Her eyes kept darting between me, the imposing director, and the two black Suburbans. Then she saw it. My Toyota. It hadn't been sent to the overflow lot or hidden behind the kitchens. It was parked directly in front of the grand entrance, a place of honor reserved for the most distinguished guest. A fresh wave of fury crossed her face. This was the final indignity. She marched toward my car, ready to demand it be moved to restore the proper order of things. She stormed to the back of the vehicle, her eyes searching for a reason, an explanation for this violation. And she saw the license plate. It was simple, stark, and utterly devoid of decoration. Just 7 characters. USG 00002. It meant nothing to her. It was just a weird, plain plate. But the club's head of security, who had followed her, saw where she was looking. He leaned in and spoke in a hushed, reverent whisper as if sharing a state secret. "Ma'am," he breathed. "That's the director's primary car. USG 00001 is the president. USG 00002 is the director of the Secret Service." Serena froze. Her entire body became rigid, the anger on her face melting away into a mask of pure, uncomprehending shock. The director's car. The thought was absurd, but Elise drove it. My sister stood there, caught in a silent, violent collision between her lifelong narrative of me and the impossible fact presented by 7 characters on a piece of metal. At that exact moment, Director Jackson stopped and turned back to me, his voice carrying clearly across the driveway. He looked directly at me in front of my sister, in front of the club's entire staff, and he used my formal title. "Director," he said, "your initial threat assessment was spot on. Deny the permit. This location is not secure." The head of security's eyes went wide with dawning comprehension.
He was looking at me.
And in that instant, my sister's world shattered. She looked from the license plate to Director Jackson to me. Her brain finally, agonizingly connected it all. The nanny, the boring admin, the driver of USG 00002, the woman he just called director, me. Her face, which had been a canvas for so much mockery and condescension, simply collapsed in on itself, leaving behind nothing but the hollow, vacant shock of a truth too devastating to process. My sister always wanted a front row seat to power. And there, in the valet lane of her own club, she finally got one. She never imagined the person in the driver's seat would be me. We didn't stay a moment longer. Director Jackson and I turned and walked back toward my Toyota. The silence between us filled with a profound, unspoken understanding. We didn't look back. We didn't need to. The image of my sister's shattered face was permanently etched into my mind, a stark monument to a worldview that had just been demolished. Behind us, the perfectly orchestrated gala had devolved into a vortex of confused whispers and panicked glances. The engine of my Corolla turned over with its familiar, humble rumble, a sound that now felt like the quietest, most definitive mic drop in history. As we pulled away, my own security detail fell in behind us, their presence a silent, protective barrier between the chaos I was leaving and the orderly, demanding world I was returning to. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic for them. The news of the fundraiser's abrupt cancellation, officially cited as unforeseen security concerns, was a public relations disaster for Ethan. His carefully curated image as a rising power player evaporated overnight, replaced by whispers of instability and poor judgment. Their social circle, a fickle ecosystem built on the perception of power, began to shun them. Serena, the country club queen, found herself suddenly isolated. I followed the stories with a kind of clinical detachment. Their collapse wasn't my victory. It was simply the inevitable gravitational consequence of their own arrogance meeting the unyielding reality of my world. 1 year later, that world had changed for me. 2. Director Jackson had retired, leaving a legacy of integrity and service. In his place, the president had appointed me. I was now the acting director of the United States Secret Service. The title felt heavy, right? I found myself standing on the famous rug in the Oval Office, the presidential seal, a tangible weight beneath my feet. The air in the room was different, thick with the pressure of history and monumental decisions. I was briefing the president on a developing international threat. My voice calm and steady as I laid out the intelligence, the risks, and my recommended course of action. There was no applause here. There were no fawning relatives. There was only the quiet intensity of the most important conversation in the world, a conversation in which I was a critical, trusted participant. In that hallowed, silent room, looking at the leader of the free world who is listening to me with focused attention, I finally understood. My legacy wasn't something to be announced at a Christmas dinner. It was something to be earned minute by minute in rooms like this. It was a legacy of quiet competence, of immense responsibility shouldered without fanfare. It was a legacy of service, not status. Later that evening, I was riding home in the back of my official armored sedan. The old Toyota was long retired, a relic of a former life. My phone buzzed, and I answered. It wasn't my mother calling to talk about Serena. It was Mark, the gruff veteran agent from my Red Cell team. He was recounting a minor snafu from that day's training exercise, how a rookie agent had mistaken a dignitary's therapy dog for a potential threat. I found myself laughing, a deep, genuine laugh that came easily. This was my family now. This circle of professionals who knew my call sign, who respected my judgment, and who shared the same dark, absurd humor forged in the crucible of high-stakes work. Our bonds weren't built on obligation, but on mutual, earned respect. When I arrived at my quiet, secure home, I checked the mail. Among the usual assortment of catalogs and official correspondence, there was a single thick envelope. The handwriting was Serena's, the same looping, dramatic script I'd seen on a lifetime of birthday cards that always felt like an afterthought. I held it in my hand for a moment, feeling the weight of the pages within. Pages I knew were filled with excuses, pleas, and perhaps even a desperate, hollow apology. I walked inside and placed the unopened letter on the polished surface of a side table. For a long moment, I just watched it. Then I turned my back on it and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights twinkling below. I didn't need to read it. My peace was no longer in her hands. It was my own. My sister believed your worth was parked in the driveway for everyone to see. I learned true worth is the silent, unseen security you provide for others, recognized only by those who matter. If you've ever had your value underestimated based on appearances, share your story below. In this community, your true license is always respected.